Hello everybody and welcome to my computer. Now, so I've had a couple of people ask me how I do my edits and how I do my, how I get my voice sounding the way I do, because it's different from my streams, and I thought I'd oblige them, but I do it in a little bit more depth, so this is a very quick guide on how I do my editing. I am, just disclaimer first, I am, first of all, not sponsored by Adobe products, but I will be using them in this video, but hopefully what I'm teaching you will be useful for any editing software. And two, I'm not a professional editor. I make video games for a living. I am a programmer. I do not know how to do color grading and stuff like that. I have a rough idea, but I'm by no means an expert. If you want to find out how to do stuff like that, recommend you go and find a specific tutorial for that sort of thing. This is going to be your basic YouTube guide for how to do YouTube for dummies, basically. Not saying you're a dummy, but anyway, digging a hole. Let's move on. It's going to be split up into 4 parts. You can find the 4 parts down in the description of the time codes. First part is how to get your footage. So it's very important when you're making a video to not only make sure that your editing is on point and your audio, but also your footage. If you don't have good footage, then what is the point of recording, really? So as you can see here, this is my setup. I've got all my scenes over here for my company live streams and for my personal live streams, all my different setups. So I've got my raw input for when I'm doing just a straight YouTube video, Facecam for when I want to do just a bit of me and the audience interaction and some other stuff set up for pre-show, post-show, that sort of thing. You know, general scenes. We've got our sources over here. This is not an OBS tutorial, so if you want to find out what these do, you can look them up in an actual OBS tutorial. There is one linked in the description that I highly recommend from an old housemate of mine. It helped me get started, and it was pretty informative. Now over here you can see the mixer. This bit's kind of important. This is a trick that I use, that I was taught by a good friend of mine, which has done me quite well, and it means I don't have to have 2 separate audio capture programs running at the same time, as I know a lot of people do. They have OBS recording and then they have Audacity open on the side and they're all recording their voice into Audacity, and there's no point, there's no need to do any of that. You can go into your mixer, you can click on Advanced Properties in here, and you can set it up. So I have it set up here so that the desktop audio, that's my game audio and everything coming through my computer, goes to track 1. This is if you're not using an XLR microphone, of course, and you're not using a proper audio setup. If you have a proper audio setup, this video is probably a little bit too simple for you. So just for the basics, if you have a USB microphone and you've got a very simple setup, you've got your audio coming in. Track 1 is going to be desktop audio, track 2 is for my microphone audio, so they're on separate tracks, and then track 3 is both of them, and that is because live streaming does not allow for 2 separate audio tracks to go to the output at once. I've got my sync off set here. That was just from doing a test record and then bringing it into Premiere Pro and counting how many frames there were different between the audio and the action actually happening, so everything is happening at the same time when it goes out, and monitoring's off because I don't want to hear myself. That is all fine. So when I'm live streaming, track 3 gets sent out, and when I'm recording, I record both track 1 and track 2. Now, if you have anything lower than Adobe Premiere Pro CC 2015, I believe, then it will not be able to read 2 audio tracks, and you will have to use the old tried and tested method of bringing in 2 separate files. One is from Audacity with your vocal audio coming in through that, and the other one is from the game. If you have them both recording to the same track, you lose the ability to do mixing after the fact, and that is very, very key to what we're about to do. So having your vocal audio separate is the main point here. I'm going to have a very quick look at the settings because, of course, this is not just a podcast tutorial. This is actually for video as well. So you can see here on the output, I have my recording. It's all grayed out at the moment because I'm actually recording. You can see audio track 1 and audio track 2 are ticked. We have MKV format. This is very key. When I'm streaming, if I'm also recording while I'm streaming, which I do with my Stonehearth series, I have experienced PC crashes before, and recording to MKV format means I do not lose the footage that I recorded because I'm streaming, as you can see on this tab here, at 3500 bitrate, which is what Twitch can handle for a 720p video. That's quite high quality. And I'm also outputting track 3 there. But when I'm recording, I want to record at 15,000. That is my standard recording level. So having to re-download my recording from Twitch afterwards, as I had to once, was horrible. So switching across to MKV means that if the computer does crash for whatever reason, it doesn't need to finish writing the file to keep your footage. It stops you losing all that juicy good footage that we're about to record. So one other important note when you are recording into MKV format is you need to remux your recordings after you finish them, because the added bonus of not losing your recording when your computer crashes with the MKV format comes with the downside of having to go back through, find the MKV file. You can see what I recorded just now there, and then you click Remux. It goes along, processes the whole thing. There we go, and the recording has been remuxed into an MP4 file. So your keyframe interval is how often Very quick example of all these things, because you need to know really. Constant bitrate is important for videos because it means you don't really lose any quality, there's no wastage. And when you're mixing it down afterwards, you want to capture the highest quality possible. Of course, whatever your PC can handle, but the highest quality that you possibly can, just because you don't want to have to add anything that you don't have later on. It's easier to subtract things than it is to add stuff that isn't there. Streaming, of course, you want CBR as well, just so that you know what's going out. And your keyframe interval is how often it will do a complete refresh. If you want to look into interlacing and how that works in files, then sure, be my guest. But 2 seconds is what I found works for me. You got high performance, just because I haven't really noticed a huge amount of difference at this sort of bit rate. And then, of course, we've also got our B frames and GPU set to 0, but that's just the what comes with the MKV and NVEC encoder. NVEC, of course, is for NVIDIA cards. It means your graphics card's going to be doing all the encoding. And for the stream, I have a different encoder, the X2641, which means that my CPU will be doing all the encoding. There we go. So onto audio very quickly. You want to make sure that tracks 1, 2, and 3 all have 320 bits set. Any lower than that, and you will hear some audio artifacts coming about in your audio files. Well, maybe some of you won't, but the more audiophile of your listeners will hear them. And of course, a video is nothing without good audio. Audio is the most important thing to get right when you're making a video. Actual audio settings, you want to make sure your sample rate is set to the same as your microphone. I'm using the Blue Yeti microphone, so mine's 44,100. Some of you might have 48,000. It's important to check that your microphone is set to the same as this sample rate, or you can get some syncing issues and some clipping and jumping sort of things happening. Video, I've got mine set to 1920 by 1080. It's basic 1080p, 60 frames per second because my PC can handle it. 30 frames per second is the other acceptable one. Anything in between, some people might experience motion sickness or anything like that. There we go. And then advanced, just leave that alone. Everything's fine there. So that is how to capture good quality footage. And next we'll be moving on to what to do with that footage once you've captured it. Although maybe we won't, because one very quick thing that I completely forgot about, I do actually have some filters and some effects on my audio before it goes out, because I can't stand the sound of my unedited voice, even on streams, and there's no opportunity to put these effects on your voice that I'm about to show you when you're doing a live stream. So I have used some of the OBS put ones in, the OBS standard ones, I should say. And you can see I've done some testing around and some working with things. I basically just have a hard limiter. It's at it's actually at -5 at the moment, that's the wrong name. It's at -5 decibels. And it says anything above that, it's going to be reduced in volume at a ratio of 32 units to 1. So for every 1 decibel above the -5, it's going to reduce it by 32 as a factor of 32, with no attack time and a little bit of release time. And that just means that there's no clipping on my stream. Well, there's a little bit, but there's not a huge amount of clipping. There's some other settings in here that I've had to play around with, but I've found that the OBS ones, when you're actually recording, aren't that good. And if you can set it up so that your microphone audio is going through something like Audition, then you will have a much better time of it. But for me, this works fine. Okay then, so on to step 2, which is cutting up your footage. Now, here we have an already edited file from an episode of Stonehearth, which I recorded from my Twitch stream. You can see me there having a lovely time. If you notice everything is a little bit smaller, it's because I'm now on my 4K screen, so everything might be a little bit too hard to see, but I will. You shouldn't need to read anything anyway. I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. So my way of editing is when you drag your footage in, you have already remuxed into your MP4, you drag your MP4 in, wait for it to conform, and then this is Premiere Pro specific, and I have CC 2015, just to date this. And I've got a few things already set up here. So I've got my blur layer and my titles and my logos and things already set up so that I can just drag and drop them in for my outros. I run with the fast cut style of editing. So you go through, if it's starting to bore you, cut it out, zoom right in. Just like if that bit was a breath I didn't like, just cut there, right click and ripple edit it. And what that does is just takes away the footage that you don't need and shunts everything up, which is quite nice. I don't really do anything too much fancy than that, apart from at the end of the footage. I don't really touch effects at all until I get back down here. So at the end of my videos, I tend to have this blur layer. So it's an adjustment layer, which I've added a blur to from the effects panel down in here. It's just a standard Gaussian blur. Yeah, there we go. So the Gaussian blur, I set it to, I believe, what keyframe is that? Over the course of a few keyframes, I'd say that's about 15 keyframes, isn't it? So I'm recording at 60 frames per second even, so that's about a quarter of a second. It fades into a 25 factor blur from 0. Back here, I cut out my audio because of any background hum or hiss or anything. I don't want that coming through. I have the game audio and then bring this blur in and bring in the renames just with a very easy little bring them on off the bottom. And then transfer into the logo just there. It's a pretty simple outro. You can be saying whatever you want in this outro bit, just as long as you've got a nice little 20 seconds. That's a tip for YouTube there. The end cards on YouTube are an incredibly good way of transferring people onto playlists or to your channel or to other people who are in the videos channels. So make sure you have 20 seconds of footage at the end, which is completely useless to you, but serves the purpose of just being a backing for the end card. Or you have some sort of graphic or something like that that you can fill up the time with. But 20 seconds is how long they'll let you have them on for. Aside from that, there are some new titles. I'm still using the legacy titles from earlier Premiere Pros, but that's not important. Basically, fast cut editing, you pick your style, you do your editing how you want to. Again, I'm not a professional editor, so I just use fast cut. So on to the next point. Point number 3 is audio editing, and that's probably what you came here for. My audio editing, I do this in the audio track mixer. Now this is I know, very ooh-hoo-hoo. Some people will say you have to do this on a separate, within a separate sequence on your audio, and then bring your sequence into here and then cut it up and then do it all like that. Personally, I just find this quicker rather than having to apply and change settings all the time. I have for some reason got a mastering set up on this. I don't know why that's set up. I don't need that at all. So let's remove that. So having your audio track mixer, I'll try and zoom in as much as I can on this. Unfortunately, it won't let me zoom in any further on this program, but so you can see up here, my audio down in my project view, my project panel, is on audio track 2. So this is me, and then audio track 1 is the game. Or anybody else on Skype for that matter. It does get a little bit more tricky when you start dealing with people on Skype and people coming through your computer, but there are ways to get around that. This tutorial is just for solo Let's Plays. So I have a notch filter. I know a lot of you have been complaining about hum that the Blue Yeti microphone has. There's a few ways to get rid of the hum. There's my other video, link to it is down in the description as well, of how to get rid of it. A lot of the times that does work. Occasionally you do come across a really high-pitched whine, and that is... from what I can gather, it's an electricity whine being picked up through the USB ports. It's the sound of electricity, basically. And it is on 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, every 1,000 hertz, all the way up to where your ears can no longer hear it anymore. And it's only really prominent up to about 7,000. So what I've done is I've created a notch filter, and I've just taken out those exact frequencies, and you can't hear it anymore. Parametric EQ is the next one. This is something a trick I picked up from a radio presenter. So there are some certain frequencies that sound good to the human ear. This setup is the radio voice, and that's how I get my voice sounding warmer, I suppose, with a little bit of high end, and you take out the more whiny tones. So my voice can't hit 60 hertz or below, so we have a high pass filter just knocking everything out below that point. So you can see there 50 hertz is where it comes in, then 60 hertz is where it really sort of comes into normal range of volume. Around about 100 hertz, there's some really nice warm, rich, low tones that you want to emphasize, but not too much. If you do it too much, you can end up making it sound really muddy. So there's only a 1 decibel booster just there. The next filter is around about 300 hertz. You start finding some of those lower end whiny tones, so little -3 decibels taken out there. Of course, if you've got a slightly higher pitch, slightly shift these values up, have a play around with it and see what you think. As you play your audio, you should be able to see the graph around here and what's actually playing, so you can see what bits you're taking out. And then I just leave these two where they are normally. I've left them on because they have a nice sort of effect. All the 3 at the end here are to boost the higher tones, and they're to make me sound slightly brighter. Next, we move on to dynamics processing, and this is the thing which is not Adobe specific. Anywhere you can find dynamics processing, or what would it be called, like compressors, any sort of compressor or filters or gates. In Premiere Pro, they've combined them all into this dynamics processing module. It is an expander, it's a compressor, it's a gate, it's a volume booster, it's everything all in one. But the trick with this is you want to use your gate. So what I've done here is I've reduced the volume of all of the audio by bringing this line down and trying to keep it matched up with the original. And that takes out any of the low end sort of hum or anything like that, any clicking or anything going on down here. Because I'm not going to be that quiet when I'm talking, and anything quieter than that, we don't need in. So we're going to take that out, and that acts as like a gate. And then beyond that point, that's just a normal volume all the way up. And then as soon as we are inputting more than around about 23 decibels, I think is where my standard audio volume comes in just before I've edited it. Anything above that is going to be super loud. That's going to be me shouting. So we want to compress that. You can see here the one line, that line there. It's at a slightly flatter angle, meaning everything above 12 decibels, you can see there. So 12 decibels, that sort of mark, gets compressed at a factor of 3, and it comes out a lot quieter than it went in. So we don't have a one-to-one relationship there. And that just stops. If I get really loud, it puts a nice sort of a buffer on the top end, meaning that I don't blow everyone's eardrums out. You will still, if you do clip your microphone on the original recording, then you can't get that audio quality back, which is why it's important to have a nice sort of audio setup, get your gain levels right beforehand, and do some test records. Fiddle with all the settings and just keep on recording and telling yourself in the recording what you're changing as you change it to stop yourself from getting a microphone clip. But in the audio itself, it is once you've got a good recording, this is what stops it from blowing everybody else's eardrums out if you do shout at any point. So once you've done with that, we move on to mastering. So I'm not sure what this is called in most other programs. This is another form of parametric EQ, I suppose. And I've got the make room for vocals preset here. I've adjusted the Q settings a little bit just to take out a little section here. It makes it sound a bit more like you're in a vocal booth. Can't really explain it any further than that, so honestly, don't understand. We've got a bit of... We've taken all the reverb out. We don't want any of that. I've got enough reverb in my room already as it is. We've got a bit of tape excitement to make it sound like a slightly older style thing, about 50%. It's not hugely important, but it just makes it sound a little bit brighter and nicer. A widener is always good because it makes it sound like you are all-encompassing the person that you're talking to and you're all around them at once. And then loudness maximizer just to bring the volume levels back up to where they should be without basically just adding to the gain. We could do the same thing by adding to the output gain down here, but what the loudness maximizer does is it crushes all the audio peaks down and brings the entire level of everything up. So it brings the average level up to around about 70% and gives you an overall nicer audio level that doesn't vary too much. The same effect can, of course, be achieved with chaining up several compressors and expanders together to try and crush the audio down to a suitable sort of range and then bringing that whole range up to the top. And then finally, I have a second hard limiter. I know I already have one of these on my recording itself, but the OBS one doesn't actually stop all of the spikes. So having the Premiere Pro one here on the end, just in case there is anything that I've missed, is just a nice little safety feature. Minus 1.5 decibels, so it's actually quite loud, and it barely ever comes into play, but it's just there as a bit of a backup, if you will. And that is all of the audio settings. I have another setup here just in case I want to play around with stuff, so I can drag my audio down onto track number 3, and it's got a different set of effects on it. But yeah, that is all of that. Now on to the last point, which is exporting. So I select my my scene down here. These settings should be the same across any sort of editing software that you may come across. And you can see here, so I'm exporting to H.264. Now this is a better form of MP4 codec, and if you don't have it, your software should come with it, but find a way to download it and bring it into your software. And I have my preset here. I've called it YouTube 1080p, 60 frames per second, 14 bitrate, 44,100 kilohertz. And you can see all the settings there in that little output text. But to run through them very quickly, we make sure that we're at the 1080p setting and we are roughly at the same as same settings as our footage came in on. VBR, variable bitrate, means that if there is not too much happening on the screen, we can save on the file size by not saving so many bits per second, basically. Only on one pass, and we're going to be rendering at 14. Now, the maximum bitrate, really honestly, you can whack this right up and it won't make a huge amount of difference. Target bitrate is the one that's going to make the difference. So a 14,000 bitrate, we recorded at 15,000, editing at 14,000. YouTube will probably crush it down to somewhere around about 12 or 13. And that means we're going to retain as much quality as we can without losing too much in the process. Because, of course, if we rendered at 15 and we recorded at 15, we could still come across some artifacts from compression and things like that. That's the important part of the rendering settings. Just make sure you have enough bitrate. If you find there's artifacts in your recording, then you need to increase your bitrate. If your recording is choppy, increase your bitrate. And if your CPU sounds like it's about to explode, then for the love of God, decrease your bitrate and also decrease the settings of your game. So that is my very quick guide on how to render and edit and I suppose record as well. The layman's guide to YouTube from the Fuzzy Mole. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to see some more sort of techie tutorials or anything else more in depth, then do leave a like down below and leave a comment as to what you'd like to see. I am, of course, making more Stonehearth videos, as you can see on the stream, and more gaming videos. So if you can head across to my channel and hit the subscribe button, that'd be much appreciated. And the bell, of course, for notifications of these new videos. When they are released, you get seen before anybody else. That's the important thing here. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you and goodbye.